Hello, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, as the case may be. It is a pleasure to welcome you to this virtual Bosse as the Academic Dean of the Ecumenical Institute at Bosse. My name is Lawrence Iwamadi. I'm a Roman Catholic priest from Nigeria. And my task this afternoon is very simple, afternoon in Geneva. It is to introduce and invite the World Council of Churches Acting General Secretary and the Director of the Ecumenical Institute to officially open this international conference on teaching ecumenism in the context of world Christianity. This conference is organized by the Ecumenical Institute at Bosse in collaboration with respective World Council of Churches programmatic desks, Ecumenical Theological Education, Commission on Faith and Order, Commission on World Mission and Evangelism, and the Interreligious Dialogue Desk. Father Professor Dr. Yohan Sauka has been in the field of ecumenical formation for over a quarter of a century. He joined the faculty of the Ecumenical Institute at Bosse in 1998, and in 2001, he became the director. He has played central role in shaping discussions on an ecumenical formation in the World Council of Churches over these years, and in the ecumenical movement in general. His leadership gave the Ecumenical Institute at Bosse its current academic shape. An important part of his contribution is strengthening the links with the Faculty of Theology of the University of Geneva, and as well as the links with the local church, the Swiss Protestant churches. He also worked hard to strengthen the relationships with ecumenical partners such as the Pontifical Council for Promoting Christian Unity in the Vatican and the Pentecostals, as well as the mission bodies, particularly Commission for World Mission, United Evangelical Mission, La Communauté Évangélique d'Action Apostolique, without forgetting the Foundation for the Theological Education in Southeast Asia. And as well with a good number of member churches who are committed, member churches of the World Council of Churches who are committed to ecumenical formation. But particularly I would like to mention two who helped to sustain two chairs at the Ecumenical Institute. And those are the global ministries of the United Methodist Church in the US and the Evangelical Church in Germany, EKD, Evangelische Kirche in Deutschland. Today, as the Acting General Secretary, Father Yohan has sustained his commitment not only to Bosse and to the WCC, but also to the entire ecumenical movement, as he looks forward to leading the fellowship towards the next big gathering, which is the 11th Assembly of the World Council of Churches, taking place in Karlsruhe, Germany next year. It is therefore my pleasure to invite him in his two hearts Secretary to welcome participants and officially declare the conference open. After his speech, my colleague, Reverend Dr. Simone Sin, the Vice Dean, who is as well coordinating this, the entire conference, will present the flow of the conference and before we move into the opening plenary. Father Yohan, please.
Thank you so much, Father Lawrence. Listening to what you said about me, a quarter of a century, I feel you already put me among the Cappadocian fathers, you know? It's a long time, but a rewarding experience in the ecumenical movement and in the Ecumenical Institute. Friends, sisters, brothers, former Bosse students, Bosse friends, It's a great pleasure for me to open this conference on teaching ecumenism in the context of world Christianity. I welcome you, our presenters and participants from all over the world who gather virtually to exchange knowledge. And I was impressed to hear that there are more than 150 who asked to be participants in this conference. Ecumenism embodies the search for reconciliation and unity, emancipation from oppression, and the collaborative work of pursuing justice and peace. Old Christianity pays specific attention to how diverse local expressions of Christianity emerge in critical and creative tension and interaction with local religious and cultural realities. It further provides space to examine the changing roles of religion in fostering identity at the intersection of faith, politics, and culture. A focus on mission as well as on interreligious dialogue has become integral and often indispensable to study of world Christianity. It is my hope that as you engage, you will open up new areas for ongoing conversations. How does the classical understanding and teaching of ecumenism reckon with all Christianity? Is there a difference or tension in perspective and foci of ecumenism and all Christianity? How does academic teaching today deal with the overlapping areas of ecumenical studies, ecumenical theology, old Christianity, mission studies, and interreligious studies? What are the fundamental methodological, epistemological, and theological commensurable issues in ecumenism and world Christianity? So as you see, a lot of questions. The WCC historic commitment to ecumenical formation makes it necessary for us to ask these foundational questions. In that regard, this conference is an echo of those late in the 1970s. Kenyan-born late John Beatty, when he was director of Bosse Ecumenical Institute from 1974 to 1980, hosted a series of 3 intercultural conferences. The goal was to bring African, Asian, and other theologians for ecumenical encounter and dialogue. The 1976 conference focused on Asian and African contributions to existing theology. The title of the 1977 conference was Confessing Christ in Different Cultures, which was followed by the 1978 conference under the theme Indigenous Theology and the Universal Church. Those conferences form a background for this conference as it grapples with the unique challenges of 21st century Christianity. As a fellowship of 350 member churches, the World Council of Churches continues to operate within a basic tension of unity and diversity as we seek together to build common witness to the gospel without erasing difference. The Old Council of Churches has long made that a core of its global agenda. At the 11th W Assembly from 31st August to 8th September 2022 in Karlsruhe, Germany, under the theme Christ's love moves the world to reconciliation and unity, the member churches are asked to put an accent on the ecumenical movement as a movement of love. The quest to imitate Christ and witnessing to Christ's love, expressed in the search for Christian unity, for justice and peace for the one human family, as we face our common future together. I hope that the outcome of this conference and of your reflections will ripple into the Assembly's agenda. Finally, as I wish you a fruitful conference, allow me to thank the 5 WCC programs that have collaborated on to host this conference, namely, and I repeat them, although our Dean also mentioned in the beginning, it's worthwhile to mention again because they put a lot of energy and contribution to it, namely, Bosse Ecumenical Institute, Commission for World Mission Evangelism, Ecumenical Theological Education, Faith and Order, Interreligious Dialogue and Cooperation. So as you see, more than half of WCC programmatic areas and staff have contributed to organize this conference. I sincerely hope that you will enjoy these 3 days of reflection and debate. And thank you very much for your participation, for your commitment to ecumenical formation, and for your love to the Ecumenical Institute of Bosse. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Father Johan. You have given us in your opening address important pointers for how the World Council of Churches approaches the theme of this conference. So thank you very much for opening the conference with your thoughts. Now, I have to say the planning for the conference actually began 2 years ago already, and a team of colleagues was involved in planning this conference. I just want to mention their names: Kusipa Nalvamba, Odair Petoroso Mateus, Risto Yuko, Daniel Rajkumar, Father Lawrence, Eva Omadi, and myself have been part of the planning team. And there were 3 objectives that guided us as we planned for this conference. We said we want to facilitate a conference that provides food for thought, especially on this relationship between ecumenism and world Christianity. So we want to dig deeper into the conceptual and theological dimension. And secondly, we want to wrestle with the question of teaching. So addressing methodological questions, pedagogical questions, that's really important. And you will see that both in plenary sessions and short paper presentations, there's a focus on that. And thirdly, this conference is also a place for ecumenical networking. We want to bring people together. We want to convene people who have expertise and passion in similar fields and who can then see important resonances between them. We have 15 plenary speakers, 35 short paper presenters, and many more participants that are joining us in this conference. I would now like to give you a short overview of the program. So you see here just this brief overview. We begin today on Wednesday with the opening and the first opening plenary. And in this opening plenary this afternoon, we will hear 3 speakers on the main theme of the conference, Teaching Ecumenism in the Context of World Christianity. Tomorrow, there will be 2 plenaries, and both are focused on changing landscapes. First, changing landscapes in ecumenism, and second, changing landscape in world Christianity. On Friday, we then focus on the question of teaching ecumenism and teaching world Christianity. We hope that there will be resonances and interrelationships between the different plenaries and the short paper presentations. So you see there are short paper presentations before and after the plenary sessions. You have seen a detailed document with all the abstracts. There are 3 parallel sessions with 3 speakers each. We ask the speakers to follow the instructions in order to enable also questions and comments and engagements with all the participants. You have been sent the Zoom links for the 3 respective sessions in the short paper sessions. So please double check again the times. The times that are given on this slide are Central European summertime. So double check which time this is in your location. So this is the overview, the flow of the conference. And just as we are together on Zoom, I would like to also share some, let me just go to the next slide. Yes, just to share some pointers for Zoom courtesy. Please keep your microphone muted to enable good sound quality for all. You may also turn off your camera. And after the 3 presentations, there is time for questions. And so when the Q&A time starts, we ask you to use the raise hand function to indicate that you want to speak, and you will be invited to raise your question in the order that you've raised your hands. As you have noted, plenary sessions are recorded, and they will be made public at a later date. If you do not want to appear on the video, you can keep your own video off, and then you're not in the video. In case of need for any technical support, you can reach out in writing to my colleague under WCC Communication Technical Support through the Zoom chat box. So we hope that this initial introduction to the flow of the conference will be helpful for you to engage with the speakers and the themes of the conference. Now we would like to turn to the opening session. We have 3 speakers, and the 3 speakers for today are passionate theologians. I mean, this is what unites them, but otherwise they are quite distinct and different. Each one of them has been engaged in ecumenism and world Christianity in different ways. So what they say today comes out of deep commitment. I will introduce each of the speakers just before they start to present. So I will now first turn to Reverend Dr. Odair Pedroso Mateos. Odair is the WCC Interim Deputy General Secretary for the Program Area on Unity and Mission. He has been teaching ecumenical theology at the Ecumenical Institute in Bosse since 2006. He has also been a member of the Secretariat of the WCC Commission on Faith and Order and serves as its director since 2015. And Odair himself was a student here at Bosse some years back. Odair is an ordained pastor of the Independent Presbyterian Church of Brazil. He holds a PhD in Protestant theology from the University of Strasbourg, France. He wrote his dissertation on Juan Luis II, a Jesuit liberation theologian from Uruguay. Before coming to Geneva in 2002 for working with the World Communion of Reformed Churches, he was involved with theological education in Brazil. Odair not only speaks about teaching ecumenism in the context of world Christianity, but he embodies it in the classroom and beyond the classroom. And I just want to share one anecdote. When Pope Francis came to Geneva and Bosse 3 years ago, Odair was sitting as an expert with the crew from the Swiss National Broadcasting Company to interpret the meaning of unity and ecumenism to this crew, but also to a broad audience who was trying to make sense of the relationship between the Pope and the WCC. And it's Odair's continuous passion to make sense of unity. So Odair will now offer us a presentation on some propositions on ecumenicity you may consider deconstructing.
Thank you, Simone, for this very generous introduction. Let's go straight to our work. And I hope that you have a cup of coffee at hand in case too much text to be read and long sentences drive you a bit tired. So I'd like to offer you today some propositions on ecumenism, or as I use here, on ecumenicity for our discussions. And I hope that these propositions will have the virtue of launching the conversation, launching the debate. Let's go to the introduction. Given that the notion of world Christianity, in the sense it is understood in the title of this conference, presupposes a critical reference to the interrelated Eurocentric projects of global modernization and global Christianization, and given the truism that the understanding of ecumenicity and the teaching of ecumenism are interwoven, it seems constructive to open this conference by asking ourselves whether we could try to reach a good level of disagreement on what we mean by ecumenicity or ecumenism. In what follows, I offer some concise propositions on ecumenicity, looking forward to attempts at discussing, deconstructing, or reconstructing them. I'll try to combine a maximum of meaning with a minimum of words brought together in long sentences, for which I apologize. And I should add that I do not subscribe theologically to all these propositions, but I find important to engage with them. Here they are. So these are the 14 propositions that I would like to go through with you. There is a narrative giving inner coherence to their sequence, and this is important to be kept in mind. Propositions 1 and 2, they point to the relations, the elective affinities between modernity and ecumenicity. Propositions 3 to 5 point to the core elements of the vision that has traditionally guided the ecclesio-ecumenism embodied by the WCC. And that means that I'm speaking from that position, from propositions 3 to 5. Propositions 6 to 11 are critical perspectives on propositions 3 and 5. These are critical points, theses that have been developed in relation to propositions 3 and 5. As you may notice, we are presenting more propositions that are critical than propositions that are firm, the work that we've been doing. I think that this is very healthy and necessary. Propositions 12 and 13 are two metaphors related to the future of ecumenical dialogue. So it's a certain continuity with 3 and 5. And finally, proposition 14 on teaching ecumenism as the description of infinite diversity brings us to the ecclesial and ecumenical situation in which we find ourselves today. So with your patience, I propose that we move to the propositions. 1, on the modernity of ecumenicity. The modern ecumenical movement is modern, not only because as a movement, it is a recent phenomenon within Christianity, but also, and perhaps mainly, because it emerges as North Atlantic Christianity renews itself and interacts with the emergence of and the progress towards one world, one humanity, under the hegemony of European colonial and rationalist modernity, by responding to it eschatologically and ecclesiologically in missionary, pacifist, social transforming, and doctrinal ways. Ways which, one, include a clear concern for Christian unity, either as a strategy or as a vision, and two, ways that were pursued through Enlightenment methods such as conferencing, for instance, on the basis of the call to take the gospel to the new end of the world, or conferencing on the basis of moral values for justice and peace, or conferencing on the basis of confessional truth claims in order to strengthen a rediscovered common ground among divided churches and address remaining differences and disagreements. Two, on the modern unity of humanity as horizon of ecumenicity. Modern ecumenicity evolved as an attempt at concerted responses to the different historical configurations of the modern vision of the unity of humanity as its constitutive horizon, by calling churches, by calling missionary societies, interdenominational movements to what follows. To join, first of all, in the expansion of Western Christian civilization and modernization through the evangelization of the world in this generation. Two, to unite in mission in opposition to what modern ecumenicity saw as the false unity of humanity in secularism, communism, and fascism. Three, to participate positively under a Christocentric universalism in Missio Dei, in the universal history of God's salvation in Christ as the final destination of the evolving history of humanity and human unity towards responsible societies. And finally, later, under the theological recognition of the sacredness of the secular, to embrace human struggles for emancipation as signs and servants of God's salvation in Christ towards just participatory and sustainable societies, or towards justice, peace, and the integrity of creation. I think we have slide 3, yes. Now, I come here to the sequence of slides of propositions on what we could call traditional modern ecumenical movement. Modern ecumenicity contends that there is only one church. The teaching of the New Testament about Jesus' messianic movement, about the one people of God, the one body of Christ, the one temple of the Holy Spirit, is subsumed under the third article of the Nicene Creed. We believe in one holy Catholic and Apostolic Church. It is held, this teaching is held firmly by Eastern and Western Christianity. It is reaffirmed by the 16th century magisterial reformers who never conceived of refounding the one church or making normal the proliferation of denominations. And it's made the quintessence of ecumenicity by the modern ecumenical movement in its early years, as it established a World Council of Churches, as it placed the term koinonia at the heart of its vision, and as it made the overcoming of the ecclesiological divide expressed in Eucharistic fellowship, its ultimate objective. 4. On the ecumenical problem as ecclesial division. As a result of proposition 3, what is meant by the ecumenical problem in its strictest sense is not the existence of diversity within Christianity, but the abnormal situation of ecclesial division represented by the contradiction between the affirmation that there is only one church and the experience that there are many churches which do not fully recognize each other as the one holy Catholic and Apostolic Church, and as a result, are not in Eucharistic communion with each other, and which exist side by side today, no longer simply as divided churches, but as confessional cultures or traditions within a growing cultural diversity, claiming consistency with the foundational tradition, the gospel, while remaining at least to some extent incompatible with each other, while bearing within themselves and among themselves the expressions of the divisions of humanity, such as wealth and poverty, xenophobia, racism, or patriarchy. Proposition 5, yes, on how ecumenicity happens. Ecumenicity understood as fulfilling the imperative of making visible in history God's gift to the Church of unity in Christ through the Spirit takes root in the anomaly of the experience of unity in allegiance to Christ, despite the experience of divisions as churches. It proceeds through dialogue, cooperation, and mutual care on the basis of the tacit recognition by each church that the membership of the Church of Christ is more inclusive than membership of their own church body, and that the other churches, whatever we may think about them, have at least what Calvin once called vestigia ecclesiae, or more positively, elements of the true church. And if we could go back to 5, and it unfolds, A, as the churches that confess the Lord Jesus Christ as God and Savior seek fundamental consensus on apostolic faith, the preaching of the gospel, sacramental life, and ministry, taking, and this is very important, as universal norms of unity. And B, as they fulfill their common calling and act together in all matters, such as the search for the unity of humanity, except those in which deep differences of conviction compel them to act separately. And now we move to the critical perspectives in relation to these past propositions. On how ecumenicity is Eurocentric, or can be claimed to be. While the European colonial expansion and the Protestant missionary expansion determined the globalization of the ecumenical problem described above by exporting to the global south the schisms and denominational or confessional expressions of violent divisions that took place during the European moment of Christianity, its solution, the solution of the ecumenical problem, ecumenicity, lost universality throughout the 20th century. In Europe, due to the persistent memory of the connection between divisions, such as the Great Schism or the Reformation, and violence, crusades, wars, for instance, its ecclesiological core remained clear and prominent, and the Enlightenment inspired the move from ecclesial isolation to ecumenical dialogue on commonalities and remaining disagreements. Whereas, in the former missionary lands, its ecclesiological core became opaque and virtually irrelevant, because the prominence of the theological heritage of the Radical Reformation in the geographic expansion of Protestantism west and southward gave it an eschatological outlook in which one, evangelism and social transformation, not always together, by the way, gained in prominence over against the European conflict of ecclesiologies, and in which, too, the conflict of ecclesiologies came to be experienced, as it seems to be the case today, as a healthy ecclesial biodiversity, and nobody wants to destroy biodiversity. 7. On the quest for the true unity as the struggle for the true division. The ecumenical theological expressions of a dialectic view of history, culture, and faith, promoted by critical theories since the 19th century, which claim the historicity of the churches and therefore right the search for Christian unity within local and global dynamics of domination and emancipation, such as colonialism and anti-colonial revolutions, center, periphery, first world, third world, dependence, liberation, north, global south, patriarchy, gender, white supremacy, minorities, and so forth, can be successively described within the ecumenical movement by polarizations, such as theological, non-theological factors in Christian unity, ecclesial ecumenism, or against the ecumenism of movements, oikomen of capitalist domination versus the oikomene of solidarity with the poor and marginalized. All of them could be subsumed by the notion of ecumenism intention, in which the quest for the true unity is at the same time the struggle for the true division. Simone, if I go beyond my time, please let me know and I stop. Okay. Proposition number 8, on the crisis or transition of ecumenicity. If ecumenicity exhibits elective affinities with modernity, it follows that it is plausible to contend, as some have done, that under deeply transformed historical and cultural circumstances worldwide, the search for the visible manifestation of the one church and the one world is not only challenged by growing uncertainties concerning the vision, the methods, and the actors of the movement, as for instance, the ecumenical movement is confronted by growing religious diversity instead of growth of a Christ-centered exclusivism, or as it is confronted by systemic inequalities and ecological crises catalyzed by globalization, instead of growing human integration through economic growth leading to progress and prosperity for all and so forth. Or as the ecumenical movement is confronted by the fragmentation of global Christianity instead of the growth of united and uniting churches towards full visible unity. So in that sense, this new historical situation tolls the bell for ecumenism as movement, signals its crisis, points to its transition to a new and more promising ecumenical paradigm. Proposition 9 on the insufficiency of ecumenical theology. The theological formulation of an ecumenical problem is not the sufficient description of that problem, and correlatively, the theological solution of an ecumenical problem is not the sufficient basis for the overcoming of that problem and the restoration of ecclesial communion. 10. On the ambivalence of ecumenical dialogue about truth claims. While modern multilateral and bilateral dialogues based primarily on the confrontation or comparison of confessional truth claims lead often to convergence among theologians, to greater friendship between some churches or world communions, and occasionally to the restoration of ecclesial communion among them, It exhibits, at the same time, a tendency to underestimate infratextual commonalities and to overestimate remaining differences, to the extent that the achievement of consensus on one controversial theme is almost inevitably followed by the identification of several new topics requiring further dialogue, which leads to the perception that ecumenical dialogue is infinite, that ecumenical dialogue is self-perpetuating, that the ecumenical dialogue is an end in itself rather than a method, and that it ultimately reinforces what it seeks to overcome by promoting the reconfessionalization of ecumenical actors, presumably in search for unity. 11, we are coming to the end. It has been argued that in contexts of fast dechristianization, such as Europe, the hypermodern condition is more conducive to, 1, growing interest in the macro-ecumenism of interreligious dialogue. 2, a fusion of traditional confessional cultural identities. Or 3, to a renewed interest in confessional identities rather than, and this is important, to the Christian ecumenism of interconfessional dialogue and organization, such as the WCC, because the remaining intra-Christian differences, which are the object of ecumenical theology and organized ecumenism, have lost their cultural relevance, their sociological density, their transparency. They have become sociological marginal or hard to be understood, and have also lost their cultural relevance in times of rejection of religious institutional authority. What may be behind the transformations of chairs of ecumenism into chairs of world Christianity or intercultural theology. 12. Now, these are two metaphors in relation to the future of ecumenical dialogue. It's possible to envisage the future of ecumenical multilateral and bilateral dialogues in ways in which textual truth claims, dialogue through texts based on normative textualities, would lose part of their hegemony as the privileged basis of theological convergences, preparing the way for ecclesial communion, in favor of a kind of archaeology of hidden communion. That means in favor of the search for underground or infratextual vestigia ecclesiae, or elements of the true church that do not necessarily find their way into texts about normative textualities, but which are no less important as potential bonds of fellowship. 13. It's possible to envisage the future of ecumenical multilateral and bilateral dialogues in ways in which textual truth claims would lose part of their hegemony by accomplishing a movement from the search for symmetric lexical equivalences between two or more confessional languages to the search for semantic equivalences between them, so that the absence of symmetric translations between words from confessional languages is not seen as an index of ecclesial estrangement, but it is transcended by the charity-based search for semantic equivalences involving different words from one confessional language that may be at variance with words from another confessional language or languages. And my last proposition. The approach to ecumenical research and study from an epistemological location, which claims to be external to the church's movement from division to their unity and the unity of humanity, may certainly postulate the equivalence of different conflicting ecclesiologies, old and new, and rely on appealing assumptions such as, since its origins, Christianity has been constitutively Christianities, or messianic Christianities tamed by imperial, Christianity. There is no universal norm whereby to reconcile the infinite diversity of churches described by ecumenical analysis with the one holy Catholic and Apostolic Church confessed in the creed for our salvation. 3, the one church confessed in the creed cannot but be invisible. Last one, there is no empirical evidence that the ecclesial landscape engendered by world Christianity converges with the search for the visible manifestation in history of the unity of the Church of Christ that constitutes the ecumenical utopia. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Odair, for this very dense presentation with 14 propositions, and actually they have analysis, but also proposals as to how we move forward. You talked about the ecumenical archaeology or the semantic equivalences, but I will not further comment. I ask all the participants to note questions or comments at this point and to hold them for the moment, because we will first listen to all the presentations and then have a Q&A session with all, having heard all the 3 presentations together, just for you to know. So thank you very much, Odair. And now we move to the second presenter. It's my pleasure to introduce to you Dr. Miguel de la Torre. He is a professor of social ethics at Latinx Studies at the Iliff School of Theology in Denver, US. As a Fulbright scholar, he has taught in a number of different countries: Indonesia, Mexico, South Africa, Germany. And with his guild, he served as the 2012 president of the Society of Christian Ethics. Now, within the academy, he is a past director of the American Academy of Religion, served as the past chair of the Committee for Racial and Ethnic Minorities. And additionally, he was the co-founder and executive director of the Society of Race, Ethnicity and Religion, and the founding editor of the Journal of Race, Ethnicity and Religion. Now, since obtaining his doctorate in 1999, he has authored over 100 articles and published 36 books, 5 of which won national awards. He is a scholar activist, and he has written also articles in popular media and has served on several civic organizations. Moreover, recently he wrote a screenplay to a documentary on immigration, which has screened in over 18 film festivals, winning over 7 awards. So we are really honored, Dr. Miguel de la Torre, that you agreed to give a presentation here in this conference. And you come to us with a question. Is ecumenism even possible on the underside of Eurocentric Christianity? The floor is yours.
Gracias and buenos dias, you all. About 60 years ago, the African-American theologian James Cone said that all white theology is satanic. Today, I live in a country where Latino and Latina children are placed in cages who are trying to immigrate to this country, where African Americans are killed because they have a broken taillight when stopped by the police, and where Asian Americans are being beaten up in our streets, thanks to the former presidents calling the coronavirus the China virus. So I live in a country where good white Christians are practicing a satanic theology that is literally killing those on the underside of US Christianity. It leads me to the conclusion that all enlightened, Eurocentric, philosophical thought and movements are detrimental to, number one, community of colors within the global North, and 2, the neoliberal victims in the global South. You see, when the French during the revolution cried out liberté, égalité, and fraternité, they never intended to include in that slogan the colonized people in Vietnam, in Algiers, or in Haiti. Liberation and equality and fraternity was only meant for white French people. The Eurocentric world Christianity established, justified this reality of excluding the vast majority of the non-European world. In the US, where I live, Christianity has become the moral justifier of white supremacy. In our last election a few months ago, white Christians voted for Trump in unbelievable numbers. 8 in 10 white evangelicals cast their vote for Trump in 2020. And a strong majority of both white mainline Protestants and white mainline Catholics all voted for Trump. When they did not get their way, these white Christians stormed our Capitol to overthrow the democratic process. So I have to ask myself, why do I want to be in unity with Christians who are seeking my exclusion, if not my extinction? Why do I want to reconcile with Christians who do not want me to have a voice in the country I live in? So does embracing Christian ecumenicism with Eurocentric Christians contribute to my own oppression? I could never have obtained a doctorate in religion if I wasn't proficient in both in Bonhoeffer, in Bultmann, and in Barth. And yet my white colleagues at my PhD school never had to read José Martí or Miguel de Unamuno or Sor Juana Inés de la Cruz. And yet I'm the one that is seen as lacking academic rigor, even though I must master the Eurocentric canon as well as the works of my own community. So for me to learn Christian ethics, white Christian history, white Christian theology, from those who have profited from my oppression and the oppression of the global South, becomes blasphemous. In the Bible, in Acts 15, the story is given of the first controversy of the Christian church, in where the Gentiles wanting to become Christians were asked to first circumcise themselves. In other words, they first had to follow the Jewish tradition before they could become Christian. And as we know in the book of Acts, it was finally decided that they did not have to circumcise themselves. And yet the circumcision controversy continues today because I, as a Latino man, am being asked not to cut off the foreskin, but rather to circumcise my own culture before I could belong to any Christian organization. I must cut my culture, my identity, a cut I'm not willing to do. To learn white theology, white liturgy, white ethics is to learn how to interpret a reality constructed to reinforce and justify the oppression of my community. To be a Christian then means enforcing my own oppression. So maybe ecumenicalism can occur when Eurocentric white Christians are not in the room. Once we find our own voice, apart from Eurocentric Christians, then maybe they can join us as equal in the discourse. And let me give you an example of why I say this. One of the problems of embracing Eurocentric Christianity is not so much that my bodies and the bodies of my people have been colonized, but more importantly, my mind has been colonized. When I was a young man in my 20s, I was living in Miami, Florida, and I decided to drive up to New York City. At the time, my hair was down to my shoulders. I had a red sports car. I had the windows down. I was playing a Gran Combo on my 8-track tape. And as I was driving through New Jersey, I was stopped by the police. And the police went ahead and did a search of my vehicle. They asked permission first, and at the time I said yes, because they're the police and they have a gun. After they searched my vehicle, I asked them what were they looking for. And the response was that all too often, Latino men from Miami going to New York are trafficking in cocaine. As I drove away after being given a ticket for speeding, going 5 miles over the speed limit, what went through my mind was not indignation for being racially profiled. What went through my mind was thanksgiving to the police because they were protecting us from crime. You see, my mind was so colonized that I literally began to see myself through the eyes of my oppressors. And I began to define myself the way I was being seen. The problem of embracing a white Eurocentric Christianity is that it contributes to that type of colonization of my mind so that I participate within my own oppression. And I become a tool of my own oppression. I think of my intellectual mentor, Jose Martí, who once said, "El vino de plátano, y si sale agrio, sigue siendo nuestro vino." And I'll be happy to translate for those who have not yet mastered the Spanish language. We will make our wine out of plantains. And even if it comes out sour, it is still our wine. In other words, what Martí was calling us to do was, when we create our philosophy, and here I would add, when we create our religious perspectives, we will do it from the cultural symbols of our own people. And it doesn't matter if we get it wrong, because it is ours. The world Christianity that has been imposed is one that already has wrong things with it. So I'm going to do something wrong. I'd rather it be from my own culture than the imposition from another culture. The first step of liberation has to be the decolonization of our own minds. Our salvation is dependent upon us learning to see ourselves through our own eyes. White salvation is contingent on me having to crucify my identity. But if whites truly want to be saved, it is they who have to crucify the Eurocentric whiteness. And let me be very clear here. When I talk about whiteness, I am not talking about skin pigmentation. I am talking about ontological whiteness. In other words, even those from the global South and people of color within the United States could be ontologically white when we embrace this white Christian philosophy that is detrimental to our own communities. So when I talk about the need to crucify whiteness, that is also a need that I must embrace in order to decolonize my mind that have been taught to see reality through whiteness. Following the God of the marginalized, the God of the global South, the God of the communities of color within the global North, becomes the vehicle, I believe, by which true ecumenicalism can occur. It may be the only way that we could come together in unity. Because frankly, I'm not quite sure I want to be in unity with a Christian philosophy that has continuously excluded me and is truly attempting to maintain my mind colonized. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much, Dr. Miguel de la Torre. This was truly thought-provoking. We need to crucify whiteness. We need to decolonize our minds. Yeah, I mean, thank you. This was profound, and I think will nurture a lot of debate. So, but I asked participants to hold on, and we will listen to the third presenter now. The third presenter is Sister Mary John Mananzan. She is a missionary Benedictine nun from the Philippines. I will just introduce her by also referring to her doctoral thesis in linguistic philosophy at the Pontifical Gregorian University in Rome. That is one part of who she is. She has been the president of St. Scholastica's College in Manila, and she has held several leadership positions within her religious order. For many decades, Sister Mary John has been active in ecumenical networks and in civil society movements as a social justice activist and a feminist theologian. She initiated women's empowerment programs and was the national chairperson of Gabriela, a broad alliance of women's organizations in the Philippines, for 18 years. Now, she has also been actively involved in the Ecumenical Association of Third World Theologians, ETWOD, and served as the international coordinator of the Women's Commission of ETWOD. And for her pioneering work in church and society, she has received several awards within the Philippines and beyond. Now, Sister Mary John is probably the most senior person in this conference. I'm not giving your age, but I guess you are the most senior person, and we are admiring your persistence. And I found out that she has been contributing to a social justice reflection in the World Council of Churches already in 1977 with a paper on women and human rights in the Philippines. So we really admire your tireless commitment for social justice and human rights, women's rights, even in the midst of intimidations and threats that you receive until very recently. But this is not the topic of your presentation today, but I think it is important for us to know the various ways in which you have been active. Now, Sister Mary John offers a presentation on the main theme of the conference, Teaching Ecumenism in the Context of World Christianity.
First of all, I am still so awed and touched and moved by the talk of Dr. De La Torre that I can hardly speak. I empathize with everything that he said. No, so anyway, teaching. Actually, this is my first involvement in theoretical ecumenism. I never taught ecumenism. I never studied ecumenism. My whole involvement in ecumenism is life, because number one, I am a member of the Ecumenical Association of Third World Theologians, and of course, during the Marcos time, I fought Marcos always ecumenically with my Protestant brothers and sisters. So that is my involvement in the ecumenism, never in a theoretical way as I am being involved now, which is for me a new experience. Okay, anyway, my context is I come from a Roman Catholic tradition from Asia, Philippines, and of course, my treatment of the topic is perhaps from this perspective, but not really completely, because I do not agree with all the perspective that I have just learned uh, because I researched it, because I'm not really familiar with theoretical ecumenism. So I researched about what do the Catholics think about ecumenism, and I was really shocked, and I will tell you why. So as I see, teaching ecumenism today in the context of world Christianity would have to consider the concept that I will elaborate in this paper. Now, from the perspective of the Roman Catholic world, Christianity, for the Roman Catholics, they consider themselves already a world Christianity since the 15th and 16th century, during the so-called Age of Discovery, when missionaries accompanied soldiers in colonizing many parts of the world, including my country, the Philippines. But that was more a plantatio ecclesia, as they call it, like planting a foreign tree in many local soil patches. Later on, we can discuss the characteristics of the contemporary world Christianity. I would just like to say that as again, that I'm not representing the Catholic Church here. I don't think that I am able to do that. But since that is where I come from, then that is where I will present what I chose as topic. Now I came across a book by James Heisig called Dialogues at 1 inch above the ground. And I find it very interesting for discussion. This, what he calls the stages of Christianity, or more specifically, Christian consciousness. Because as you will see, when we come to the stage 5, then you will wonder what would be ecumenism in that kind of stage. No, so he considers the stage 1 the teachings of Jesus. So he says the first stage obviously was that of Jesus' teaching. Though we may never come to a clear picture of precisely what constitutes Jesus' own contribution and how much was added later, there is substantial agreement on the main teachings and also on the fact that later interpretations and developments aside, there is something of universal appeal in this teaching. This is therefore the non-institutionalized teachings of Christ as interpreted and written by the early Christian community. Now, the second stage is what he calls Christianism, which is marked by the transformation of the teachings of Christ into a systematization of doctrines, practices, and structures. At first, there was immense variety of opinions and practices and very little uniformity, but which later on came into force with the development of the hierarchical church. So, the stage 3 in this development is what he calls Christendom. The third stage, that of Christendom, shows the emergence of Christianity as a mode of civilization associated with the assumption of secular power. It is marked by two significant events. One, the conversion of Constantine, which resulted in the church being set within the boundaries of the Roman Empire, with less emphasis on apocalyptic expectation and becoming more on earthly institution committed to maintain order in society. Now, the second event was the crowning of Charlemagne. This was the ultimate transition to Christendom. In place of a multiformity of structures, a uniform episcopal constitution anchored in imperial law took over. In place of diversity of creed, the Nicene Creed was enforced as legally valid for all churches of the empire. The word orthodoxy was introduced at this point. The stage 4, Christian religion, belongs to a more recent past and marks the transition away from Christendom and towards seeing Christianity as a religion, as one religion in a multi-religious world. Stripped of its secular power, positive steps were made to rethink its new role through the missionary movement in 19th century by both Protestants and Catholics. Culture became the new weapon. Convinced of the superiority of their culture and science, missionaries set out to colonize the world for the Christian religion, transplanting in the colony structures and philosophic assumptions which prevail until today. I think this is what Dr. De La Torre was talking about. However, not all the vestiges of Christendom have disappeared. Now, this is a very interesting stage, I think. In the final stage, an era whose dawn has already come, we might call Christianness. By this is meant a personal form of religious consciousness that identifies itself as Christian without belonging to a particular ecclesiastical institution. There are two modes to Christianness, she explains. I am speaking in this first case of identifying oneself with the community of Christian heritage in a self-critical way, confessing belief in the teachings of Jesus without extending that belief to the current forms of the Christian establishment. The second mode is one where Christianness sees the possibility of people of other religions converting to Christianity without giving up their own primary symbols or even institutional affiliation, and also opens the possibility of Christians inheriting the religious riches of other religions into their own religious consciousness and practice. He concludes, in short, the transition to Christianness does not do away with the Christian mission, but alters its nature from a confrontation between religions to a synthesis within personal religious consciousness. Now, if I have to be honest, I identify myself most with this stage 5, meaning Christianness. I have come to believe in my years of experience that it is, for me, I don't know how you will take this, but for me, religion is like the atomic theory. It is like trying to explain experiences, maybe transcendence or something, but it's trying to explain theoretically what this experience means. But like the atomic theory, it can change because the experience, for example, of the world can change the atomic theory. And I believe the same thing with religion. Another thing is that I believe personally that God has put all these gems in all religions, whatever it is. And if I believe that I am a daughter of God, I am the heiress to all these gems in all religions. And therefore, it's up to me whether I would like to really uh, take hold or what do you call this, inherit these gems. So that is where I am coming from. So I do not know if many Catholics will agree with me, but that is honestly the way I understand what religion is. And in this case, if you have these states of Christianness, what does ecumenism mean here? It seems to me that it becomes like obsolete because um, because of the explanation. No? But anyway, I'll go to the next because
we are project, but
I beg your pardon. Did somebody say anything? Okay. Now let me tell you what is ecumenism in the more official consciousness of the Roman Catholic Church. Now, ecumenism is undisputedly and originally a Protestant concept and practice. I regret to say that for a long time, Catholics believed that there is no salvation outside the Catholic Church, which I, although a Catholic, think is preposterous because that would make God so uneconomical. In Asia, there are only 3% Christian and or maybe 2% of which are Catholics, and most of them are in the Philippines. Now, I cannot think how can anyone believe that God will simply allow 98% of the people he created to be lost. Ridiculous as it may seem, it still influences uh, some Catholic understanding of ecumenism. Now, ecumenism appeared in the Catholic vocabulary and became a relevant matter to the Roman Catholic Church only at the Second Vatican Council, 1965 to 1969, which produced a decree on ecumenism, Unitatis Reintegratio, on November 21, 1964, which states the term ecumenical movement indicates the initiatives and activities encouraged and organized according to the various needs of the church and as opportunities offered to promote Christian unity. Thus, it is the unity of the church which is the primary focus of Roman Catholic participation in the ecumenical movement, while for many of the churches of the Reformation, it is collaboration in mission. For the strongly confessional Protestant churches, the Orthodox and Roman Catholics, the doctrinal divisions among believers are fundamental and therefore is the primary motivation in their ecumenical endeavors. Now, according to a Vietnamese Catholic priest, which has an article which I read, there seems to be three elements in the Catholic understanding of ecumenism. The first, according to this priest, is the theological, liturgical, and biblical renewal, which makes the evangelical reality of the church to shine through the contemporary Roman Catholic communion. The decree on the liturgy of the Second Vatican Council, returning to the common patristic sources shared with the Orthodox on the one hand, and receiving the insights of the biblical witness of worship in the Reformation churches on the other, urges the fullness of the gospel to be manifested in Catholic liturgical life. Such elements of renewal as the rite of Christian initiation for adults, a more nuanced approach to the rites of reconciliation, and a Eucharistic liturgy more in harmony with the great tradition of the church are all elements which brings us closer to the separated brothers and sisters in non-Catholic communions. I have really a difficulty about these separated brothers and sisters, which is being used in the Catholic Church. Um, the second major element in Roman Catholic understanding of the ecumenical movement is the theological dialogue toward restoration of full communion. Now, this is where I got a problem. So I I actually called a bishop who is my friend. I called my cousin who is a Jesuit, and I called a theologian who is a um, what do you call this, Vincentian. And I told them, is this still what the Catholic Church is wanting to have? Is this still possible? This what you call a restoration of full communion. And what does that mean, full communion? Does it mean again what we were saying before, that oh, you come to me, all you separated brethren, and then we will become one? Now, I have a lot of problems about that. No, the principle underlying this dialogue is that reunion is effected not by compromise but by a common biblical and historical study to find a ground of truth which transcends the historic division by the power of the Spirit working in the ecumenical movement. That is the hope of the Catholic Church. Now, the third major Catholic commitment to the ecumenical movement is through common as well as uh, cooperation in such areas as education, public and private morality, social justice, matters connected with culture. And this is what I have, this is the only involvement I have with ecumenism, as I told you, no? That during the time of Marcos, we were really together, even in a 3 hour masses of the people, as we would call it. It was not really a mass, but really a liturgical ceremony among us, which lasted 3 hours because we listened to the sufferings of the basic masses, the farmers, the workers, the urban poor, the people in slum areas. We had the common stations of the cross, as we call it, but we were all together. But even now, my feminist what do you call this? My feminist involvement is together with Protestant and all kinds of feminist theologians, and we do not have the feeling that you are from there and I am from there. Even in the ITWOT, even the Ecumenical Association of Third World Theologians, we theologize as one. We did not theologize and saying what is the point of view of the Roman Catholic, what is the point of view of the Protestant. No, we were theologizing as uh, one brotherhood and sisterhood. And in fact, I have more difficulty discussing theology with traditional Catholic theologians than with ITWOT, with all the members, Protestant members of the Ecumenical Association of Third World Theologians, which is from Asia, Africa, Latin America, and the United States. Now, what is the contemporary understanding of world Christianity? Definitely it's not the understanding of the Catholic Church before that, because we are all in the different colonized communities where we spread the gospel. Because now there are, I think, some factors that make our world today really, really like a small village. And one of that is, of course, um, globalization, and of course, the tremendous advances in information technology, which have made the world a virtually one village. Added to this is the phenomenon of the notable increase of Muslim conversions in European countries. And of course, there are also the new threats such as religious fundamentalism, ethnic conflicts, ecological crisis, etc. And also, I would like to say that there is kind of a reverse missionary activity now, where people from the south are the ones actually going in mission to the north, which formerly colonized and Christianized them. Now, the challenges facing ecumenism today is, of course, the economic system based on the idea of unlimited growth and feeding the greed of a few. The constant danger of conflict and war through competition for power and resources, and an inadequately equipped international system that was meant to ensure just and durable peace. The changing ecclesial landscape with the growth of churches and Christian communities that have kept a distance to the ecumenical movement. There are certain uh, new sects that do not want to have anything to do with it. And then the impact, I said, of information technologies that have revolutionized communication and enabled new forms of cooperation and networking, but also contributed to the formation of new conflicts concerning values and human rights, not only between diverse societies, cultures, and religions, but also among and within churches and Christian communities. Now, if I want to teach, as I told you, I never taught ecumenism to anybody. But if I would teach, of course, I have to teach to Catholic students. So, what would be my suggestions for anybody who's going to teach Catholics? Now, first, I would like to begin with presupposition. Now, this is for me very important. This attitudinal imperative to engage in a fruitful ecumenical dialogue. Catholics have to rethink the idea that a complete fusion as a goal is possible, and especially not a fusion where you know with arrogance this Catholic Church will gather to itself all the separated brethren. I am so ashamed of that. I would like to apologize for any Catholic dialogue among Christians, but I don't think that is enough now, because Christianity you know is living now with different religions, different culture, different beliefs of indigenous people. So it's not only dialogue with different Christian churches, but really with the culture of the indigenous people. Now, with us in the Philippines, I am sorry to say that the missionaries, when they came here and they were confronted with what kind of missionary method they will use, they did not choose De Nobili and Ricci, who studied first the culture and the beliefs of the people of China and India, and presented Christianity as not contradictory to that, but in a sort of there is some connection to it. Whereas the missionaries in the Philippines, what they decided was anything that is before Christianity in the Philippines is demonic, And therefore, they considered everything, all the beliefs of the indigenous people here as demonic. So, and that made us Filipino Christians what they call we have what we call split level Christianity, because my ancestors did not, although they said yes, obeyed the missionaries who were always accompanied by soldiers. They deep in their hearts, they kept their original beliefs and their customs. So now I believe that there must be real dialogue with the beliefs of the indigenous people, because frankly speaking, I find so many valuable virtues and values in the belief system of my ancestors. Now, and then the suggested content of the ecumenical course for Catholics. For me, they have what we call exposure immersion program with a community of different religious denomination or indigenous community, because I don't think you can really how understand people unless you live with them, you know. So I would do that if I were in a university. I would let them stay for months with a either a different religion or with the indigenous community. And the course content would be the evolution of Christian consciousness according to James Heisig, history of the ecumenical movement, study and critique of the Catholic Church understanding of ecumenism, study of the basic tenets of major religions and of at least one indigenous tribe, and principles and concrete practice of theological or biblical dialogue. And I would, of course, they should have research, and I would really make them research on the 5 stages of ecumenic of the development of consciousness. And I would really want them not only to know in principle, but they should practice ecumenical cooperative actions on social issues such as justice issues, meaning poverty, economic exploitation, colonialism, neocolonialism, globalization, gender questions like the woman question, LGBTQ, ecological crisis, religious fundamentalism, and a quest for just peace. And of course, since they have to have research, as I said, each phase of Heisig's evolution of Christian consciousness should be further researched, and there should be comparative study of several religions, for example, on the treatment of women, success stories, successful religious collaboration on socio-political issues. My conclusion is there, and I am addressing to all of us. My dear citizens of the world, Christianity, which is all of us, to be honest, we have to acknowledge that there are maldevelopments in our respective institutional churches which have prevented us from truly being sisters and brothers. Let us transcend this and go back to the spirit of the early Christian community by loving each other as Christ loved us. And together let us build not one church, but one whole humanity. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Sister Mary John, for your presentation and your input. I think it has been very clear, your assessment of the situation, not only in the Philippines, but also beyond, and your clarity in engaging institutional normativity from kind of grassroots ecumenism has been very strong. So thank you very much. Sister, for your presentation. Now I open the floor for people to raise questions, comment, and the way we want to do it, as I mentioned in the beginning, is that please raise your hand. So because in Zoom, as you might know, if somebody raises the hand, then the person will be made visible to us, and then so you can raise a question or a comment to any one of the 3 speakers, or also across the 3 presentations, because I think there have been important resonances between the speakers. I see in the chat that people have thanked the speakers for their engaging presentation, clarity, provocative, clear questions that have been raised. So whoever wants to start, may start. So I see John, I don't know the name, and I hope that the person can, yes.
Yeah, that's me.
Yes, please, you have the
Okay,
floor.
all right. Okay, so my name is Kwabena Asamoah-Jedu, speaking from Accra in Ghana. My question is to Miguel. I thank you all for your presentations, but I had reference to the way in which we have been colonized, if you like, in terms of Christian practice, in the adoption of Western ways of
What's that?
in the adoption of hello, can you hear me, please? All right. In the
Yes,
adoption of Western ways of being religious. How do we, in teaching world Christianity, how do we avoid an us and them syndrome, if you like, between Western and non-Western Christianity? You know, it's very easy to talk about the fact that our theological worldviews and mindset has been framed through our engagement with Western Christianity. And if we are trying to teach world Christianity in a way that will serve as a corrective to what we have inherited, especially in these days when seminaries and university departments have people from across the globe, how do you teach it such that we avoid the creation of an us and them syndrome? Thank you very much.
Thank you for your question. Let me begin by saying that if there is an us and them syndrome, it is not the Global South that created that syndrome. It has been imposed upon the Global South, in where we in the Global South are the them, the other. So I think the question becomes, how do those who have been defined as the other by Western Eurocentric Christianity still respond and teach in a way that we could maybe have more of an attempt to have a more productive conversation? The Latinx community in the United States have a concept that we call napanta, which comes from the Aztec word. And napanta is a word for that in-between space. So in my own body, I have flowing both the blood of the colonized and the colonizers. It was my ancestors, the Spanish ancestors who massacred the indigenous people in my island of Cuba. But also in my blood are both African and indigenous individuals who were among the massacre. So I literally, my very body occupies that in-between space. So it's not so much us versus them. For me, it's both part of my heritage, which is European, Spanish, and part of my heritage, which is both indigenous and African, and part of my island. So my napanta, this in-between space, is how I teach. I come from that, where I'm critical, obviously, as I did during my presentation, of Eurocentric Christianity, but I'm also critical of my own people, of my own community, when we go ahead and uncritically accept the definition of Christianity from the Western European perspective. So there is this inner conflict that goes on as I teach. And probably the philosopher Miguel de Unamuno said it best: if I'm contradictory, it's because my very being is contradictory as a human, and where I am not accepted in Cuba because I have become too Americanized, and I'm never going to be accepted here because I'm too Latino. So so it's not so much a us versus them, it's this new space where a lot of us find ourselves in. And that is from that space that I do my teaching.
Thank you very much. I think we could go on this specific question, but I see two more hands already raised. So I would like to give them the floor. So first I saw Jude Lal Fernando, and then second comes Metropolitan Seraphim.
Thank you, Simone. This is a question and a comment concerning Miguel's reflections. I'm fully with you, Miguel, 100%. One clarification, isn't there an artificial binary constructed between Biden's ostensible liberality and Trump's, robust white supremacism? Doesn't it reflect the 16th century Valladolid debate between Bartolomé de las Casas and Sepulveda? Las Casas wants to include, Sepulveda wants to exclude. And Biden, in a way, is adopting white supremacism in a more liberal way, using the same xenophobic rhetorics against China and the rest. Any comment on that?
First of all, I think you're absolutely right. A few years ago, when Obama was running for president, I wrote an article that said, what does Obama, Hillary Clinton, and John McCain have in common? All three are white ontological men. All three will defend empire. All three will send people to die for McDonald's and Microsoft and Mobil Oil. So basically, now that we have Biden, it may be a nicer, gentler form of oppression, but it's still oppression. Our children are still in cages. So no, I totally agree with you. I think this liberal and conservative dichotomy that is created is a false one, like you said, because all of our presidents continue to want to impose this Eurocentric empire on the rest of the world. So you have no argument from me there. Now, living in the United States, I will admit, I'd rather have Biden than Trump. At least I could breathe a little easier, but even though I could breathe easier, I'm still being suffocated.
Thank you very much for that. I see Metropolitan Seraphim coming next, and then Vasiliki after that.
Can I hear you?
We cannot hear you, sorry, Metropolitan.
Unmute yourself.
Okay, yes, if you leave and come back, maybe just leave and then you come back. So in between, we will listen to Vasiliki's question, please.
Yes, okay. Hello, everybody. Well, although I teach Ecumenism in the University of Athens, it is the first time I have the opportunity to follow such a meeting. So I'm very happy I can participate in this session. What troubles me is the meaning of the term or the notion of white Eurocentric Christianity that Dr. Miguel referred to. So to make a long question very short, I asked Dr. Miguel, do you use this term as we used to say Western Christianity in the past? Is it the same more or less? If not, then as an Orthodox from South Europe, Southeast Europe, then I would have a problem to identify myself with white Eurocentric Christianity, colonization, and so on and so on. So I would like to really understand what white Eurocentric Christianity means. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. For me, white Eurocentric Christianity is the faith tradition that provided the justification for colonialism, for the genocide of indigenous people, for the stealing of other countries' natural resources and their cheap labor. It provided the religious justification for genocide, land theft, and resource theft. Now, I could also, while I use that term, speaking within a Christian context and speaking specifically about the area of my expertise, which happens to be Eurocentric Christianity, I have no doubt that there are other religious traditions and other forms of Christianity that are just as guilty in the plundering of the world. Now, I use white because it is basically this whiteness that has that has attempted to use religion to lift us up as exceptional and as supremacist. But as I said earlier, when I say white, I'm not talking about skin pigmentation. I am talking about the ontologicalness of whiteness, in where there are people of the global South, and there are people within communities of color in the United States whose actions are just as white as those who adhere to white supremacy. And I would like, I would like to know if my panelists have a different definition of this word that I'm using, or if they want to push back on it.
Then it is what we used to say some years ago, Western Christianity, just to find the similarity. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, that was just Vasiliki coming back on the point. Yes, yeah. So my proposal at this point is that we listen to Ricardo's question. He has raised the hand. And after that, yes, indeed, the panelists also can engage one another. So that is true. So, but now first, let us listen to Ricardo.
Thank you. And my question is not only to Dr. De La Torre, but Sister Mary and Dr. Pedroso. Latin America has the fastest growing evangelical, Pentecostal, neo-Pentecostal. The Catholic Church membership is one of the biggest in the world. But when you go to the world arena talking about political movement, seldom you see Latin American voices represented. I'm pleased that Dr. De La Torre and Dr. Pedroso are part of this panel. But when I go and see how many people are connected to this conference, you seldom see Latin Americans. I'm taking a course with Dr. Simon in the Ecumenical Institute. I'm really grateful for the opportunity. But there are only 3 Latin Americans in the course out of 70 students. So what we have to do as Latinos to increase our voices and our representation, but also what the ecumenical worldwide movement has to do to allow Latinos to be at the table. That's my question. Thank you.
I mean, I could begin. As I hear the question, I'm reminded of the old adage that while liberation theologians made a preferential option for the poor made a preferential option for Pentecostalism. And I'm wondering, and it is not in any way or shape to dismiss Pentecostalism. I think it's an important movement, and the Spirit-filled movement is crucial. But there's an aspect of Christianity that buys into this prosperity theology, in where, and I think that's such a capitalist theological perspective, that God wants me to be rich. And obviously, I grew up in poverty, and I would love a theology when I was poor and living in the slums of New York that said that God didn't want me to live that way and wanted me to be rich. But the problem is there's so much other baggage that comes with that. And a lot of it is this type of Eurocentric theology that I've been talking about. So I'm not surprised that the voices of those in the global South, and specifically in Latin America, that have a perspective more like myself are usually not invited to the table because it disrupts this capitalism design of God wants me to be rich. So I think that might be one of the reasons. So I applaud the invitation to be here with you all today and to have this conversation, because at least this is where, to the previous, one of the previous questionnaires, here's where I'm critical of my own group and my own people. It's not just that I'm lashing out against Eurocentric Christianity. There's a lot of stuff that we Latin Americans have also embraced that are problematic, whether it be, and we know what they are, sexism, racism, and all the other ills that are also very present in the global North.
Urair, please.
If I could make a very brief historical reference to Ricardo about I would go back to the beginning of the 20th century and tell him that in one of the first conferences that are normally referred to as the beginning of the modern ecumenical movement, the Protestants wanted to bring the Anglicans on board, which was extremely important for them. Then the Anglicans said, well, yes, we can come on board into this whole thing if you don't bring the churches that are doing mission in Catholic lands, because the Anglicans want to reconcile themselves with Rome. As a result of that, there was a policy adopted that missions in Christian lands, like Protestant missions in Latin America, would not be invited to the conference. So when you pick up the classic narrative of the ecumenical movement, pointing to that conference as the beginning, so that was not the beginning of the inclusion, but in the case of Protestant churches in Latin America, was the first exclusion. And then the history will continue. But I wanted just to point to you that this is a long and painful history, and it includes certainly the theological profile of neo-Pentecostalism in Latin America today, like Miguel has pointed to. Thank you. Metropolitan Serafin is back.
Yes, I just saw that there's in the chat also a comment from Mika Purba affirming what Sister Mary John proposed in relation to the teaching, to the content, expanding the teaching also to indigenous communities and religious. I think I just want to flag that and highlight that.
And also, may I say something? I am not very fond of ecumenical conferences. No, I would rather that we share our ecumenical practice, like I said. I mean, in the time of Marcos, and even now, we are not even thinking. We go with the Protestant. No, it's just natural for all of us to go to a rally and all of us there, Protestant Catholics. We are not thinking of ourselves and we are having an ecumenical anything. No, we are fighting injustice. We are fighting tyranny. We are fighting this, and we are all one with that. I don't care what religion you have, or even if you have no religion. As long as we are fighting for the truth, for justice, for human rights, I don't care at all whether we are united in this doctrine or in that doctrine or in that practice or in that practice. But are we all one in bring about a humanity that is more just, more caring, more loving, more compassionate. That is what I am interested in.
Thank you very much for this clear plea. Now, let us listen to Metropolitan Serafin. I think he is
okay.
back.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, very good. Oh, excellent. Yeah.
First of all, thank you very much, Professor Simon, and to your whole team for the wonderful way you presenting us three people. I try to prepare myself by going back to read more about the three speakers of the opening session to be able to follow up. And I am happy to say that there are three sections today, three voices. The executive of the Faith and Ortec somehow is the child of the ecumenical movement from the WCC. No choice, he has to go back to the history of the WCC. And Professor Mary, I was very impressed. She expressed the voice of the ones they want us, we want them to be with us, the Roman Catholic Church. So they are not still with us, and we want them to be with us. And as our Arctic Secretary General mentioned, our priority to love, and we experienced this through the visit of the Holy Father when we celebrated the 70th anniversary, and we are looking for this. And then the third voice of the Professor Torre, I was very impressed when I read his background, and he comes to express the voice of the society. And the ecumenical movement is for the whole society. So my question to him is, what St. Paul did when there were problems to his letter to the Corinthians? What he tried to give pastoral instructions, the ones who are away from the teaching of Christ, that they need more care from us. And then let me remind you, all of us, we know this, but just to remind you, in the first line of the Constitution of the WCC, we emphasize about the uniqueness of Christ according to the scriptures. So scriptures play an important role for us because our unique identity as Christians, as you know, all of you, is about Jesus Christ. But today, an article in Greece, I saw for a very serious metropolitan, I'm not going to mention his name, but they published the text everywhere. He said, the intention of the WCC is to establish one religion for the whole humanity. So stay away from this. And then he attacked the Roman Catholics and the Protestants because they came to the point for reconciliation. Let me also remind that the four main objectives of the ecumenical movement, and we have to stay there to respect our previous voices. Number one, the unity. Number two, how to promote the prayerful search for forgiveness and reconciliation. Here, maybe I was impressed by the three speakers. We ask, we're talking about forgiveness, but we never mentioned up to now in the history of the ecumenical movement to ask forgiveness. We are ready to ask the people, to forgive the ones who did bad things to us, but we don't ask the people who did bad things to them to forgive us. And this is the term metanoia, which is not in the text of the ecumenical movement, because I saw that the translation of the Bible in Europe, and I think Professor Stathocosta, I tried to reply to her question also, they translate the term metamelia and metanoia. Metamelia is something used for Judas, and for Zacchaeus, metanoia means to change your mind, and it leads to life. But metamelia, and they translate in the same way, the one of Judas, he led to the homicide. So it's two different things.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
And finally, I would like to the three speakers to tell us to take into account the publication of the Professor Warner about the future of the ecumenical movement in the 21st century, what we have to emphasize in our General Assembly in Germany next year in this direction, because at the end of the constitution of WCC, we mentioned that we want to promote one human family in justice and peace through education, Christian education. Sorry for this.
Yes, thank you very much, Metropolitan Sheriff, for pointing us to the term metanoia. I think this actually really relates to the content, but I would like now to give the floor to each one of the three speakers just for 1 minute to say what was an insight that you gained through, during these 2 hours today. Just 1 point, please. Let us do the same order. So I would like to start with Odair, and then Miguel, and then Sister Mary Joan.
Well, I think that the conversation was extremely helpful, challenging, and encouraging in its own way. And it confirms a lot of the perplexities that we have had in recent years, as we try honestly to ask ourselves how we move forward with the ecumenical utopia in the present circumstances. And I would simply say, add that I'm happy that as we move to the next assembly of the World Council of Churches, we have managed to build in the approach of the topic the theme of compassion in the Greek sense of Matthew 9:36. His guts were touched by the situation of the people around him. As an hermeneutical key to the theme, and hopefully as something that may inspire us to redefine the ecumenical agenda for the future.
Thank you, Odair. Miguel, please.
You said one thing, but I have to say 2 quick things, and I'll keep it to a minute. First, to respond to the previous questioner when he talked about the importance of forgiveness. Totally agree. But I remember the words of Bishop Tutu, who said, if you steal my pen and ask for forgiveness, what good does it do me if you still have my pen? So forgiveness is important, but we also have to talk about restitution for that which has been stolen and taken. And if without restitution, there can never, ever be forgiveness. But to your question as to what am I taking away from this? As you know, this is the first time I've been invited to speak at a World Council of Churches forum. And to talk about ecumenism, I was a little bit hesitant because of my views, and I wasn't quite sure if it would be accepted. So I entered this with a certain degree of trepidation. But I'll be honest with you, after listening to the other 2 panelists, after seeing some of the chat conversation, I feel at home that this is a conversation that we are having and that we should be having, and the importance of listening to the voices of the Global South in redefining whatever ecumenicalism is supposed to look like. So I'm very pleased and I'm very encouraged, and I no longer have that anxiety I had when I first entered the conversation and the Zoom space.
Thank you very much. Now, Sister Mary Joan.
Well, as I said, this is the first time I engaged in theoretical discussion about ecumenism, because I never did. I just did it, no. But it seems there is a point to discussing things, no, because many things are clarified to my mind and all that. So I come out of this conference really enlightened, and you know, I still have to really reflect a little bit more, and not just going on practicing and not reflecting on what I am doing. So that is what I'm getting from this being a part of this conference. And I would like to thank you so much for having invited me here, and I hope that we will see each other in the future, after the pandemic.
Yes, so thank you very much to all 3 of you, to each one of you. for bringing your perspective, for bringing them in a clear, provocative way, but at the same time connecting with one another, connecting with the challenging issues that we have to address together. So I think this is a start. This has been the opening plenary for the conference. The conversation goes on. And I think what we look for is really these connections between the different voices and faces that we need to have in the room around the table. So I encourage everybody to come back tomorrow first to the short paper session. And let me just share the screen.
Moderator, many people are thanking you for your moderations.
Okay, yeah, I'm not looking at the chat because I'm focused on really advertising the short paper sessions tomorrow. It's at 11 a.m. in Central European time, but please check your time. And I put it before your eyes. You have the full abstracts of all of these papers, and we warmly invite you to that. It's 1 hour session. Then there is 1 hour of break, and then we go into the second plenary, and then the third plenary, and so on. So, but I wanted just to put before your eyes the short paper sessions. And again, thank you very much. Of course, I thank our acting General Secretary, Reverend Professor Johan Sauka, for opening the conference, and my colleague, Father Lawrence Ivarumadi, for welcoming all of us here. I wish you now a good afternoon, a good evening, and I look forward to seeing you tomorrow. Thank you very much.